All right. When we left off in chapter 7, Esther did this masterful job of accusing Haman of being treasonous, and it was a really kind of an, a demonstration of jujitsu and karate and judo put together. It was, um, and she really aggravated the king, and ultimately Haman got taken out. Um, but I decided that a good title for this class was "Everything Takes Longer Than You Think," Part 1. So um, here is our outline for today. We're gonna spend some time reviewing chapters 1 through 7. We're gonna look at our questions and today's answers. We're gonna make some final notes about Haman. We're gonna look at Esther's second approach to the king and her tears. We're gonna look at Mordecai's status change, the king's response to Esther's request. Actually, those two are in opposite order. And then we're going to look at Mordecai's edict. So let's start with chapter 1. Somebody look at chapter 1. All these chapters are, I don't know, less than 20 verses long. Somebody give me your bullet point summary, and I will give you mine when you are finished. And you can do it collectively. Just throw something out there. How would you?
First, he reigned over 127 territories, had a party after fighting off rebellions for 180 days, and had a smaller party for the top people for 7 days. Then he wanted to bring his wife out to show off her beauty to everybody. The smaller party, she refused. They then sent out a decree that women must obey their husbands, basically took her queenship away from her.
Very good. Thank you, Brad. He jumped in with the easy one. So, calling out the history, we really started with history. So it starts in the third year of the king Xerxes' reign. Most scholars think that it was between 586 and 565 BC. It opens, like no other book in the Bible, by showing the indulgence, the opulence, the I don't know, just wealth of the Persian Empire. There's vast lands that go from India in the east to Africa in the west. Lots of drinking, lots of eating, lots of partying, incredible wealth on display. And the king banishes the queen because she will not show her beauty and crown to the nobles and the peoples in the palace. Now, I want to go back to this and just say that these are images that I've taken. This is actually, I think it's Susa. These are actual places in Persia currently. For those of you who haven't had a chance to visit Iran, and all of these little gold things scattered throughout are individual gold chalices and cups in museums throughout the world. And I think somewhere in Esther it says everybody got a gold cup, and it was different from every other cup. So it's quite an extraordinary place. What about chapter 2? Somebody want to summarize chapter 2?
The king realizes that he's banished his wife and becomes lonely.
Okay.
So he decides that he wants all of the virgins that are beautiful. Well, his council gives him the idea of taking all of like the virgins who are beautiful come together and throwing a harem. And then after they all while this is happening, one of the virgins that are taking this is a girl named Esther, who is a Jew who's related to Mordecai, and they are from the tribe of Benjamin, from Judah, and they were taken during the Babylonian exile. And after they and how the beauty pageant-esque thing works, where the virgins go in one at a time. They're allowed to choose any item that they want to try to please the king. And Esther basically wins the contest. She becomes the queen. And then Mordecai discovers that there is a conspiracy to kill King Xerxes, and then tells Esther about it, and she reports to the king, and the credit's given to Mordecai. And through all of this, there is no. Esther keeps her nationality secret because Mordecai told her, and when credit is given to him for saving the king's life, it's written down in the annals of their.
Persian Chronicles.
Yeah.
Very good. You guys are good. I mean, you better jump in here early because the act is getting harder and harder to follow as we summarize. So what I wrote down is, so there's a timestamp here. Well, yeah, there's a timestamp here. The book starts in the 3rd year of Xerxes' reign. What's he been doing for those 3 years before? We talked about this. There's a couple of rebellions going on in Persia. You've got one in Egypt. You've got one in Babylon. Those 2 cities. We get now to chapter 2, and what year is it? Hint. It's year 7. What's been going on between year 3 and year 7?
Partying?
No, we have not been partying. What's that? He went to Greece.
Oh, yeah.
He went to Greece and he burned Athens, right? I mean, they made a movie about this, the 300 and Thermopylae and all that. That was Xerxes. And he's come back, and the way it was expressed, he was lonely, but really in the meantime, the maybe he was lonely. We don't know what he did in Greece. But he doesn't have a queen, right? And he's gotten back, and his advisors tell him, we've got this idea. It seems good to him. They send out, let's see, by way of his advisors, he decides to have a beauty sex pageant to select the next queen. The Persian Pony Express is used, which is very famous because of the Royal Road. It is thought that they could cover 1,476 miles in less than a week. It's used to announce and collect women from all over the empire for this pageant. Since there are 127 provinces, you have to assume that there's at least 127 women who have been submitted to this pageant. Esther is selected to participate in the pageant. Mordecai, I put uncle, and that is wrong. What? Mordecai, Esther's cousin, tells her not to reveal her ethnic identity. We talked about the fact that Mordecai, perhaps we've speculated that Mordecai advises Esther about her ethnic, hiding her ethnic identity, because he knows that the king wants a Miss Persia as his queen, and he wants a Persian first mentality. And we also speculated that perhaps Vashti didn't want to come before the king because maybe she was Egyptian, maybe she was Babylonian, and I promised that we would present some evidence to that effect, and we're going to do that today. We speculate. Let's see here. Esther then is chosen as queen in the 7th year of the king's reign, and then Mordecai uncovers, as it was said, an assassination plot to kill the king. Esther tells the king about the assassination plot in Mordecai's name. Okay, so chapter 3. Who wants to summarize chapter 3?
Haman gets promoted
Okay.
to the second name guy, and then Mordecai refuses to bow to him. You know,
Yep.
and say pay homage to him, I guess. And then makes Mordecai really, really mad, so he wants to get back at, or makes Haman really, really mad, so he wants to get back at Mordecai. but just killing Mordecai is not enough, so he wants to kill all the Jews. So then the way he goes about it is he tries to go to King Xerxes and paint this picture of just people all over the kingdom that are not of his people. Like it's a different nation living in his nation, and that's a serious threat to the crown. So then the king's, I think the king is, oh, and he offers to pay him a lot of money, and just thinks he can come up with way more money than makes sense. So then the king agrees, and he sends out a bunch of letters to everybody to say basically we're going to kill the Jews, young, old, women, and children.
Okay.
And then he starts to cast lots to determine what day. Determine what day all the Jews will be killed.
Right. Anything else? Okay. What did I write down here? The scripture over and over and over, when it mentions Haman, pulls out his genealogy, right? He's an Agite. He is an enemy of the Jews. He rises, as was said, to the second most powerful position in the land. Mordecai refuses to bow down to him. Haman reveals that he seems to have an anger management problem, and he is obsessed with power and glory for himself, oversized ego. He doesn't want to seem petty, so rather than punishing Haman alone, he comes up with this genocide scheme to exterminate the Jews. He casts lots to decide the day of the genocide. When the lot finally comes about and he figures out what day it's going to be, then he goes to the king. He presents his scheme to the king in a way that suggests the Jews are inappropriate and uncooperative immigrants that pose a threat to the empire. The king gives his signet ring to Haman and allows him to, as it says, do as you wish. Haman offered him, as you said, a crazy amount of silver, right? Like 300 tons of silver. And the king says, "No, go ahead and keep it." The edict then Haman sends to the provinces comes to in the king's name with the king's seal, but not necessarily with the king's knowledge or understanding. And now that Esther is queen, she seems to be a bit more imprisoned than before she was queen. She's not seeing Mordecai on a regular basis. She doesn't seem to know what's happening in the capital city, much less the empire. And she finds out about this in chapter 4. So who wants to review chapter 4? Somewhere in here, there is a timestamp. Okay, we're not going to. So here's my review. So Mordecai hears about this edict, and he goes into mourning. Esther learns about Mordecai's mental health situation, and she sends one of her servants out to find out what's going on. At this point, the story is beginning to accelerate because for the first time in chapter 4, we actually get quotes. Up to this point, we've only had the narrator telling us what's happening in the story. But now we're starting to get into the minds and into the thoughts and into the quotes that are actually happening with these people. And it's a technique that's used to really draw us in and accelerate the story. Mordecai tells Esther that she must go to the king, beg for mercy, and plead for him for her people. Esther reminds Mordecai that there's a "you could die" clause in the court etiquette handbook. She's not sure she wants to do that. Mordecai gives the famous outsized quote, "For such a time as this." Esther conceives a strategic plan and agrees to approach the king and asks Mordecai and his friends to fast with her for 3 days before she goes. And then Esther gives what I call a Seinfeld response to Mordecai as her last words, because she has no idea whether or not she'll ever see her cousin, who is acting as her father, again. I might die doing this. And I will show you what Seinfeld response is, if I'm connected. Let's see if this will work.
People like to say those kinds of things. It is what it is. Steve, if you repeat a word twice in a sentence, you can say that with a lot of confidence. Business is business. Rules are rules. Deal's a deal. When we go in there, as long as we know what's what, who's who, whatever happens, happens, and it is what it is.
Okay? So, what does Esther say? Does anybody remember? Does anybody have the quote there? If I die, I die. If I perish, I perish. Okay, that's a Wednesday dancing. And we better turn that off. We can watch Wednesday Addams another time. Okay, so back to, hey, where is it? Really? Okay. I want to stop here. I want to make a little practical application about wisdom. Crying aloud in the street. I think that chapters 5, 6, and 7, and ultimately today in chapter 8, we're going to see applications of these verses. If you've ever wondered, what does it mean to be not of the world, in the world, but not of the world? What does it mean to be as wise as a serpent and as innocent as a dove? We're seeing this play out. And I want you to remember that the human representative in the story of Esther is more representative of God is Mordecai and Esther. I want you to think about their behavior and what they do, and I want you to think about your own life and how that might have application. Because there's some weird stuff in here that you have to ask. I mean, it goes against conventional wisdom, just like hiding her identity. Sometimes we think you should always be open. You should always be completely transparent. And yet, she was being wise as a serpent, and or shrewd as a serpent, and innocent as a dove. And we'll see some other things as we go on here in the story. So let's talk about chapter 5. I tried to give you some hints with this picture, what happens in chapter 5. Someone summarize it really fast for me. Yes, you are free to read the book. It's just a few.
Royal clothes goes to the doorway of the court where Cersei is. He sees her, acknowledges her, let her come in by lowering his scepter. He could tell something was wrong with her, asked her what she wanted, give up to half of his kingdom and wealth to her. She said, basically, I want to throw a party for Haman and you to be there. Pretty much the party happened. Again, he asked what was wrong. She then said, I want to throw another party for both of you tomorrow. And then basically when the second party happened, Haman pretty much was flustered, so was Cersei. Cersei went out to the garden. Haman tried to make amends and
It only goes this far.
oh yes. Haman in the meantime had made, between his advisors and family, they basically said to kill Mordecai, make a pike to hang him on, go to the king, talk about it.
Okay. So Esther approaches the king in her queen regalia. And I want to remind you that Esther approached the king and told the king about the assassination plot in Mordecai's name, but we never get any of this drama, right? In this particular situation, she puts on her royal regalia and approaches the king. The king gives her the go-ahead to approach him. He knows that she is troubled, and he asks her to make her request known. The king offers up to half of his kingdom. For the first time, Esther asks the king and Haman to come over to a drinking party that she's planned for him, and that is the way it reads in the text. At the party, the king again asks Esther for her request and promises to give up to half his kingdom for a second time. Esther demurs and asks the king if Haman can come to another drinking party tomorrow that she will prepare for them. Again, what the text says, that Haman leaves the party happy, but he's upset because Mordecai won't bow down to him as he's leaving the party. Haman expresses his anger towards Mordecai and his expresses his anger towards Mordecai and his bloated view of himself, his importance, and his accomplishments to his friends and his wife. Haman's wife and his friends suggest that he build a 75-foot pike upon which to impale and hang Mordecai. Haman's wife and friends suggest that he seek the king's permission to execute Mordecai in the morning and go to Esther's party happy. All this advice seems good to Haman, and so he sets up a pike that night. What happens in chapter 6?
I give this one a good chapter. I think it's my favorite chapter in Esther.
Okay.
So the king cannot sleep that night while Haman is talking to his friends and family about impaling Mordecai. And so he calls him an advisor and tells him to read the book of like chronicles that happened in court, either as a way to just like get some really heavy reading to knock him out, or to just get some work done when he can't sleep. And as they're reading, they find out that they read about Mordecai who saved the king's life. And he's like, "Hey, what did we do for that guy? Like, you saved my life. What did we give him for that?" And his advisor said, "Pat on the head, basically, like nothing. He got nothing for that." So the king asks, "Is anyone in the court that I can like talk to? Because I want to give this guy something." And Haman walks in because Haman is about to ask the king if he can impale Mordecai. The king, before Haman can get out his request, says, "What should be done for the man that the king delights to honor?" And Haman was so full of himself the night before, thinking he has all the favor of the king, so he thinks to himself, "Who would the king want to honor more than me?" He's asking me what gift I would want, and then he's going to give it to me. So Haman says, "Well, if the king really wants to honor someone, he should have that person dressed in the king's own robes and all of his like special jewelry, and placed on a horse and be led around by someone really important, like one of the king's own sons, one of the princes, and proclaim to everyone that this is the man that the king delights to honor, and he thinks it's all going to happen to him." And King Xerxes says, "That's perfect. Yes, go and do that immediately for Mordecai." And Haman has to swallow his pride and everything and go and do that for his mortal enemy who's just about to have to kill. And he has to be the one to lead him around to arrange everything and to say, "This is the man the king likes to honor." And then Haman runs back home and he's feeling awful and he's like, "This went so horribly." And his advisors and his friends and his wife said, "Hey, these are the Jews. That there's actually like a lot of stuff that happened with the God, and you might not be able to actually stand against Mordecai because he's Jewish." And then right after they say that, Haman gets called for the feast with Esther and Xerxes.
Perfect. Thank you. I don't know if I can say it any better. The king can't sleep. We were asking when we went through this, why couldn't the king sleep? Maybe it's because Esther came and said, "I'd like to throw a party for you and Haman. I've already prepared it for him." And maybe the king is asking, did I hear her correctly? Did she say him? Did she say us? Maybe the king is asking, if I did hear her correctly, who's him? Is him me? Or is him Haman? And why won't she tell me what's troubling her? So he can't sleep. He pulls up the Persian Chronicles. He starts reading about the assassination plot. The king wants to honor Mordecai for saving his life. Haman can't seem to take his wife's advice and wait till morning to come see the king. He's coming to see the king when the king's supposed to be asleep. And I want you to think about that. The only reason that the king sees him is because he can't sleep. So this is pretty late at night. So he comes in at bedtime, or after the, it says in the evening, but it's after bedtime. The king doesn't let Haman make his request because he's so excited before he asks him advice about how to honor Mordecai. Haman's ego won't allow him to think that it's anybody but himself. He asks for the very clothes and the animal that the king has used himself. For the honoree, the king likes the idea. He says, go and do it to Mordecai and lead him through the city and scream, this is who the king wants to honor. Haman is humiliated by this task. Interestingly enough, Haman goes home and talks to his friends about it. I don't know that I have those kind of relationships where I go home and tell people how humiliated I feel. I might be able to take a lesson from that. His wife and his advisors tell him that they think he's toast because Haman's a Jew. And then he gets whisked away to the second drinking party. All right, chapter 7. Who would like to review chapter 7? So at the second party, Esther's second drinking party, and that is the literal translation of what was said there in chapters 5 and 7. The king asks Esther for her request. He again promises for a third time to give her up to half his kingdom. She asks for her life and the life of her people. Esther emphasizes that if it was just slavery, it wouldn't have been bad enough for her to bother the king. But this genocide is just too much for her. She says that her adversary, when the king asks, the adversary and the enemy is Haman. She frames Haman as committing treason against the king and against Persia. Haman is terrified. To put it in someone's words here, the king is pissed and he goes to the garden to calm down. Haman falls onto Esther's lap and begs for forgiveness. The king walks back into the room and he thinks that Haman is sexually assaulting Esther. This is this is comedy, right? This is comedy of errors. I mean, who thinks that your mortal enemy is trying to attack your wife sexually? Harbona, the king's eunuch, tells him that Haman has one of those nifty little impaling poles already set up in his backyard. The orders of impalement are charged against Haman. Haman expires and he is removed from the story going forward. The king's anger subsides and he has no one second in command. If you remember, the last time the king got really angry and then something was done so that his anger subsided, he found himself, did I finish my sentence? Without the first time, without a wife. And then we get Esther. Now he's angry and I shouldn't say another death because there wasn't a first death, but after Haman is punished, we get him without a second in command, and so that's our review. Now let's talk about our questions, today's answers, and final notes on Haman, Esther's second approach, her tears, Mordecai's status change, the king's response to Esther's request, and Mordecai's edict. Here, early on, we put 13 questions together, and we've been slowly trying to answer them. The two that I want to focus on today in chapter 8 is the story seems to be over at the end of chapter 7. Why doesn't the story end here with something like this? After Haman was hanged, the Jews killed their enemies. Mordecai and Esther proclaimed the victory, should be memorialized with a holiday called Purim, and they lived happily ever after. Why doesn't the story end that way? Yes?
Well, another part of it is that the tension's not quite over yet from a story perspective. Because even though Haman's dead, his plot still is in the law, and a signet ring signed thing by the king cannot be overturned in Persian law.
Okay.
So no matter what they do, that there's still going to be that day where you're legally allowed to kill Jews.
Right. So it appears that the king was so upset when he said to Esther, "What is your request?" And she said, "My request is what does he say? What is your petition? What is your request? My petition is that you spare my life. My request is that you spare my people." And we talked in that class about how probably if you were the spouse of someone and you learned that your spouse was under threat, their life was under threat, you probably wouldn't hear anything after that. The king seems to have addressed the first request, but not the second, right? Everything takes longer than you think it's gonna. That's where the title of this class came from. And then we'll also focus on why did Mordecai write an edict to destroy, kill, annihilate armed men and annihilate armed men and their women and children and plunder their property. This is why, as we talked in the beginning of this class, that many Christian scholars reject this book. This is how Hitler fomented anti-Semitism using this book. How can you have any empathy for the Jews when they write edicts like destroy, kill, and annihilate men, women, and children and plunder their belongings? Is that Christian? I don't know. Let's find out. Okay, so Esther hasn't yet saved her people. That's why the book can't end. A final note on some of, now we're into chapter 8. Final notes on Haman. So Haman offered the king 330 tons of silver in exchange for Jewish genocide. I don't know where he came up with that cash, but that seems like a lot of disposable income. So I created a picture here of a pretty big estate. And the king gives this estate to Esther. Esther gives the estate to Mordecai, and then Esther reveals her relationship to Mordecai, to the king. What else was I going to say about this? Oh, I think I'll leave it at that. So let's talk about Esther's second approach. So she approaches the king for a second time, and it says she's crying. Can somebody explain this to me? Why is she crying now? Like, Haman's dead. And Haman's estate has been given to her. Somebody will come up with a good answer. Why wasn't she crying when she first approached the king? When she came up with that Seinfeld line, "If I perish, I perish. I'm going to go and I'm going to cry and beg in front of the king."
Because the first was about her, the second was about her.
Okay, so what do you say?
She realized that the edict was still in place, that her people would be annihilated.
Okay, so but wouldn't you cry about your own life? I mean, she doesn't even know these people. I'm just pushing back a little.
Selfishly, you would think.
Yeah.
Could be tears of relief, kind of like she has to hold herself together because she doesn't know how the king's going to react to her.
Initially, yeah.
And so she has to like keep herself presentable, keep herself like focused on the task. And then when she realizes that she does have the king's favor, that he will give her what she asks, that it kind of like
Relief.
releases and breaks down.
Yeah. I would suggest that she actually has more at stake here. in this second request than she did in the first one, because she's played all her cards. The first time she played the cards of my life, I'm your queen, you like me, we love each other, we have this good relationship. I can play that card, and I can spin the story, and I can make Haman the bad guy, and I can get Haman gone, and I can get the edict revoked. But it kind of didn't go all that way. But now, what is she saying to the king? She's saying, I have a loyalty that is more than just a loyalty to Persia. She's actually saying, I'm not that Miss Persia that you placed as queen. I have my own people. I have people that I'm loyal to, and I'm coming here asking you to revoke this edict. This may come as a bit of a shock to where are we in time? Where are we in Xerxes' reign? Do you know? Do you remember? I looked for it. I couldn't find it. I know. I think I know what it is, but I just couldn't find the specific verse. I think we're in year 11. Okay, so year 3, the book starts. Year 7, she becomes queen. We've been going on now for about 6 years. They've been happily married. Everything's just tooling along. She's living in the palace. She's, life is good, living large. And it's because she's supporting the king in his effort to unite this gigantic kingdom and making it first and foremost. And she is the representative of that unified kingdom. And now she's having to say, actually, there's a people that I have that are my favorites. And I belong to them. I don't just belong to Persia. This is further evidence that would suggest Mordecai knew something when he said, don't tell them you're Jewish. That's why I think she's breaking down. This is her most vulnerable moment. Go ahead.
Sorry, I found it's Esther 3 verse 7 is it says in the 12th year, and that's when all the other events take place after.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, okay. So she pleads for people to be saved. The king again extends his scepter. So this is a little weird, but what we have here is this is Esther acting in her official capacity as queen, not in her capacity as husband. Thank you. Everybody needs a wife. Esther reminds the king that Haman is the son of Hammedatha, the Agite. Esther asks the king to revoke the order regarding the Jewish genocide that Haman has created. And then the king recounts everything that he's already given to Esther. Does the king grant Esther's request? What do you think? Does he grant her request?
Kind of a loop around.
Okay.
He couldn't just take it off the books. He changed it so that he gave him hope. The way out.
Okay. One of the things that's missing in this particular conversation between the queen and the king, what's not there after the king lowers his scepter and says, "What is your request?" What's not there in this particular account that has been there over and over and over? Yeah, over and over and over. Yeah, there's three overs. There are 2 overs there.
Drinking party.
No, but that's a really good one. That's good, Brad. That was good. Right. The king's like, just tell me what you want, Esther. I'll give you up to half of my kingdom. So that's off the table. I like this is this guy, and And what the king does is he says, I gave I gave Mordecai the signet ring. I gave you Haman's property. I killed Haman for you. Really? What do you want? So let's quickly review Mordecai's status change. So it's interesting that Mordecai gets all this stuff, right? I mean, he just seems to go through this meteoric rise. I mean, the king did want to honor him, and he did save the king's life. So he has demonstrated a real loyalty, right? He's working in the palace. But now, at the beginning of the chapter, before Esther goes and asks for a revocation of the edict, the king brings Mordecai forward, gives him the signet ring, right? Just immediately says, if this is the guy has treated you like your dad, and he has demonstrated that kind of loyalty, and I have this kind of love for you, I'm going to give the signet ring to him. I'm going to make him second in command. But he also was given this nifty robe made of blue and white cloth. He was given this large crown. That's the phrase that's used there in chapter 8, a large crown of gold. I don't remember that Haman got a large crown of gold. He also was given a second garment made from purple linen, signifying royalty, if you will. And then I just want to make a little note. This looks a lot like somebody else we've seen, right? And hopefully, week after next, we'll get a chance to make some comparisons between Joseph and Israel, and that whole story of Joseph saving the Jews, and this particular story. Okay, so let's talk about this edict, because we need a little time to talk about this edict. So Mordecai, this was the king's suggestion. So why do you suppose, we talked a little bit about this earlier in the class. What if there was what if in the United States, if there was a law on the books, there was another law that said you can't ever take a law off the books if it's on the books? How realistic is that? And we used this as one of the pieces of evidence when we talked about, is this a true story? Is this not a true story? And we didn't come to any conclusions about that. What's more important than the historicity is, do we hear the conversation or the communication between the divine and humanity? Because that's what's most important in this story. God didn't say, I'm going to give you a history book. God said, I'm going to give you inspired writing that will give you wisdom. So, but let's go back to this, you can't not write something. One of the conclusions that most people come to when they talk about that from a political standpoint is that would make it impossible to govern. If you write a law and then you can't unwrite that law, you can't strike that law from the books, this is an impossible way to govern. However, maybe, just maybe, if you're king, you don't ever want to retract your words because you don't want to look weak. Because in this day and age, people were thought to be divine. People, the Caesars, the emperors, the kings couldn't make mistakes. How could you possibly retract a statement that was made if it had the king's signet ring on it, the king's approval? The king decreed this. How was he wrong to decree it? I don't know that he's saying we have a law that says you can't do this. I'm just speculating, but I'll just throw that out there. But he makes a suggestion. Let me try and help you. Let me partner with you. I gave you my signet ring. You guys figure it out. Write something and put my seal on it. So, but then it reads like a mirror to Haman's. There were 3 words: destroy, kill, and annihilate those who attack you, their women, their children, and take their spoils as plunder. Why would he do that? What do you think? Is this because he's just lost sight of who God is? Do you think he's lost sight of Jewish ethic? Do you think that he is just, it's a fit of rage on Mordecai's part? What do you suppose makes him write this very controversial edict? Put yourself in his shoes. An edict has been written probably 7 or 8 months ago.
He's probably trying to keep with what the previous edict wording was, make it sound and look like it was still from the king.
Well, it is from the king, right?
Well, but if he uses his own words and didn't necessarily use that mirroring word sentencing structure, it might make it look like the king is unsure about the previous or this one and just trying to cover his tracks.
Yeah.
So by using the same wording, structure, verbiage, it's looking like, the king is still in a strong foothold with his kingdom, his leadership.
Yeah. So if you're the governor of a province, and 10 months ago you got an order, it seems a little weird. Like the king has given an edict for civil war, for genocide. There's going to be this day, 12 months from now, when the king has approved of neighbor killing neighbor. And then 8 months later, you get another edict. And you're the governor. And it says, you guys can defend yourselves. Just get along. I mean, he could have written an edict that said, we want everybody to get along. But he didn't. He wrote an edict that mirrored exactly what was said. What is that? What are you thinking as a governor of the province? What are you trying to discern?
What's the goal? Why is this in law? What's the purpose?
Right. And probably most importantly, I would be asking myself, what does the king really want? Whose side is he really on? Is he just is this just like for sport? Is this just some Hunger Games kind of nonsense going on here? Whose side is the king on? Because I don't want to be on the wrong side, right? This is brilliant on Mordecai's part. He is being shrewd as a serpent and innocent as a dove. He is saying, I'm not going to give you any way to know whose side the king is on. These two people have a balanced order. And I am going to, okay, so he also, it says that it was written to the Jews, to the satraps, the governors, the princes of the province. And it also says that it was written both in Hebrew and in the local provincial language. And history tells us that this was absolutely the way that it happened. But it's interesting that that the Hebrews, the Jews still have their own language. They've still preserved their language, their culture. And Mordecai makes sure they're able to read the edict themselves in their own language. And it also says something about who wrote it, right? Mordecai is now in charge. And then it says the Jews were full of joy, lightness, honor, gladness. And then it says other Persians were full of dread, and that many of them converted to Judaism out of fear. Well, that reframes evangelism, doesn't it? I'll just let you settle with all that. Think about what this says about the divine, about humanity, about who we are. And tomorrow, or at least next Sunday, tomorrow you should start reading chapter 9 and 10. There's only 3 verses in chapter 10. We'll finish the book, and then the following week, we'll get into some analogies with Joseph and some practical applications. Thanks for your attention. We're done.